The humid air of the jungle clung to her skin like a second layer. Every breath she drew was heavy with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. Her hands were scratched and bleeding from the thick underbrush, her clothes torn from the relentless vines and branches that reached for her like grasping fingers. She had trusted them, trusted the people who had promised to guide her through the wilderness. But now, standing in the shadow of towering trees and hearing only the distant call of predators, she realized how wrong she had been. It had started innocently enough. She had been recruited for an adventure, a survival expedition meant to test her endurance and courage. The men she followed smiled often, reassuringly, speaking in calm tones about how the jungle would teach lessons that cities could never offer. She had believed them. She had trusted them. And that trust had been her first mistake. When the path narrowed, twisting through a grove of ancient trees and murky swampland, they began to slow. One of the men, tall and muscular, glanced at her with a subtle sneer, though she thought it was a trick of her imagination. But as they reached a particularly treacherous stretch of mud and fallen branches, the subtle sneers became overt. Words whispered behind her back were sharp, almost hissing. "She can't keep up. Just leave her?" Her stomach knotted. Something in her chest tightened, not just fear, but a surge of disbelief. Could they really abandon her? The thought seemed impossible, but the signs were all around her. Their pace quickened. They gave her only cursory glances, no longer offering a hand to help her over fallen logs, no longer pausing to encourage her when she stumbled. They were leaving her. The first moment of betrayal came when she tripped over a tangled root and fell into a patch of mud. Her knees stung, her palms were scraped raw, and her heart pounded in panic. When she looked up, the group had disappeared, gone into the green maze of trees, their silhouettes swallowed by the shadows. The anger and confusion that surged through her collided with raw, paralyzing fear. The jungle was silent, too silent, as if it was holding its breath in anticipation of her next move. Alone, she tried to call for them. Her voice cracked and rang out, bouncing off the trunks of ancient trees, but the only answer was the distant growl of some unseen predator. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out every other sound. The ground beneath her feet seemed unstable, every step a potential trap. She was suddenly aware of the smallest noises, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant splash of water. Each sound could be life or death. Panic clawed at her throat. She ran, her movements frantic and uncoordinated, branches slapping her face, roots tripping her feet, her lungs burning for air that the humid forest refused to give. Her mind raced through the faces of the ones who had abandoned her, searching for some trace of remorse, some flicker of humanity. But they were gone, swallowed by the jungle as if they had never existed. She realized with a sinking heart that their betrayal was deliberate and act of cruelty, disguised as practicality. Night approached swiftly, the jungle darkening to an almost oppressive blackness. She could feel the temperature drop slightly, and the sounds changed. Nocturnal creatures stirred, insects hummed in a relentless chorus, and predators prowled unseen beneath the foliage. The canopy blocked out the fading light, and shadows grew long and threatening. She huddled under a makeshift shelter of leaves, wrapping herself in what little clothing she had left. Her teeth chattered, not just from cold, but from sheer terror. Every rustle of the underbrush made her flinch. Every distant roar made her imagine a predator leaping from the shadows. Hunger gnawed at her stomach with merciless insistence. She had eaten nothing since the morning. The small snacks she had packed were gone, left behind in haste, the wrappers scattered like cruel reminders of the life she had been promised. Thirst began to burn her throat, and the air, heavy with humidity, offered no relief. Every swallow felt dry, gritty, impossible. She knew she would have to find water soon, But the thought of moving through the jungle at night, blind and alone, made her stomach churn with fear. Sleep became impossible. The shadows seemed alive, shifting and slithering, as if the jungle itself were watching, judging, ready to strike. Her mind replayed the betrayal again and again, turning it over like a knife in her chest. Why? Why would they do this? She remembered the smiles, the camaraderie, the shared jokes and encouragement. Were they all lies? Had every word been nothing but preparation for this moment of abandonment? By midnight, desperation outweighed fear. She knew she had to move or risk being caught unprepared. She tried to recall survival tips she had learned in passing. Follow streams, find shelter near water, move quietly, stay alert. The practical advice collided with the raw fear in her chest. One wrong step could snap a branch and draw predators or worse, the attention of humans who might not help. She took a deep breath, ignoring the shakes in her legs, and forced herself forward. Hours passed, and the jungle tested her at every step. Mud clung to her boots, roots tangled her feet, and her scratches had begun to sting painfully. She felt the sharp bite of insects, the stinging sweat in her eyes, and the constant pressure of exhaustion pressing down on her chest. Every noise seemed amplified. The splash of water, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind through the trees. She imagined jaguars, snakes, even crocodiles in the water she crossed. Her imagination and the jungle worked together to create terror. But with terror came awareness. Each time her foot slipped, she learned to place it more carefully. Each time an insect bit, she adjusted, finding ways to cover her skin with leaves. Hunger and thirst sharpened her senses rather than dulled them, forcing her to observe the jungle with a keen, calculating eye. She was learning slowly that this betrayal had forced her into a crucible where only instinct, intelligence, and courage would ensure survival. By dawn, she had found a small stream. The water was murky, but drinkable. She knelt, cupping her hands to drink, and allowed herself a moment of relief. The chill of the water against her lips and tongue reminded her that she was still alive. Alive, yes, but alone. Her stomach twisted at the thought of her betrayers, the people who had left her to die. But anger sparked a new determination. Survival was no longer about hope. It was about revenge in the form of endurance. Hours later, as sunlight filtered through the dense canopy in hazy beams, she paused on a high ridge to look down into a valley. The jungle stretched endlessly, green and threatening. Birds called overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a predator roared. Her body ached, her lips were cracked, her hands cut and swollen, but her eyes burned with resolve. She whispered a promise to herself. I will not die here. I will survive, and I will be stronger than they ever imagined. The jungle had been her prison, her tormentor, and now, in that first light of day, it became her teacher. Every sound, every shadow, every obstacle was a lesson. The betrayal had forced her into a world she never understood, and it would be the crucible that either broke her or forged her into something unrecognizable to her enemies. She didn't know what lay ahead, predators, hunger, exhaustion, and possibly death, but she also didn't know she was about to discover allies even more formidable than the jungle itself. In the distance, unseen eyes observed her, trained and calculating. The jungle had claimed many, but it had never encountered someone like her. And soon she would learn that survival in the wild wasn't about avoiding danger, it was about mastering it. For now, she moved forward, every step a declaration. She was alive. She had been betrayed, abandoned, and left for dead, but she would not yield. The jungle had met its match in her determination. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of her betrayers, destiny waited. The sun had barely risen when she opened her eyes, stiff and sore, the jungle alive around her with the symphony of insects, birds, and distant animal cries. Every sound made her flinch, her pulse spiking as if her chest wanted to leap free. The betrayal from yesterday still burned, raw and unforgiving, but survival demanded focus. Hunger gnawed at her belly like a relentless predator, her throat dry, her lips cracked and bleeding. The first challenge of the day was simple in theory. Move, find food and water, and avoid death. Simple, but the jungle made nothing simple. She rose, trembling, brushing mud and leaves from her clothes. Each movement hurt. Her legs felt like lead, her hands blistered from gripping roots and climbing over fallen logs. Yet she forced herself forward. Every step was a calculation. Branches could conceal snakes, mud could hide pools of water teeming with leeches, and the slightest misstep could alert a predator. Her mind, once clouded with panic, sharpened into hyper-awareness. She listened for the slightest rustle, watched for the smallest movement, and breathed only when she judged it safe. Hours passed, her feet blistered and bleeding, and hunger pressed down on her relentlessly. She had learned to recognize which plants were safe to eat and which were not, and scavenged fruit fallen from low-hanging branches. It was bitter, sometimes sour, but sustenance came in whatever form the jungle allowed. Water was harder. Streams were often contaminated, teeming with unseen dangers, but she had learned to test them cautiously, filtering with leaves and sand to remove sediment before drinking. Each sip was a victory, a small defiance against the wilderness determined to claim her. Night approached, and with it came the sounds she had feared most. The rustle of the underbrush, the snapping of twigs, the low growl of a jaguar in the distance, all combined into a soundtrack of terror. She found a tree with thick roots forming a natural alcove and climbed into it, her muscles burning, her back scraping against bark. Nestled there, she tried to rest, but sleep was fleeting. Every sound jolted her awake, every shadow seemed to crawl toward her. Fear was constant, but it was also teaching her, forcing her to adapt. She began to observe the jungle, learning its patterns. Birds signaled the presence of predators. The wind whispered where danger might lie. The tracks of smaller animals hinted at water sources. She noticed how snakes avoided certain plants, how monkeys moved in groups to warn each other of threats, and how to use the cover of vines to move undetected. Each observation was a lesson in survival. The betrayal that had left her for dead had inadvertently turned her into a student of the wild, learning the rules the hard way. Hunger grew worse as she continued. She discovered a patch of edible roots and cautiously dug them out, scraping away the dirt and chewing slowly, savoring the meager nourishment. Her body craved protein, but small animals were too fast and elusive. She considered trapping a bird, but her lack of tools made it risky. The jungle offered lessons in patience. She remembered this and restrained her panic, letting instinct and observation guide her. Every leaf she moved, every step she took, became part of a careful choreography with the forest itself. Exhaustion pushed her to the brink. Her muscles screamed, her vision blurred, and her hands were raw from navigating the unforgiving terrain. She stumbled along a muddy riverbank, slipping into the water and narrowly avoiding a sharp rock. Her heart pounded not only from exertion, but from the fear of what might lurk: unseen crocodiles, jaguars, or venomous snakes. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and yet she refused to sit down and surrender to despair. She realized she had learned something vital. Survival required relentless persistence. The jungle tested her body, but her mind had become the weapon she would rely on. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dense forest, she found a temporary sanctuary. A rocky outcrop formed a small ledge overlooking a stream, the flowing water providing both sustenance and a comforting white noise. She knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink and washing the blood and grime from her scratches. Her reflection, distorted in the moving water, revealed a face unrecognizable from the woman who had entered the jungle yesterday, eyes sharper, expression hardened, and a determination burning through her exhaustion. She shivered as she ate a handful of berries and roots, alert to every sound. A low growl echoed from deeper within the forest. She froze, every muscle tensing, every nerve screaming. Slowly, cautiously, she crept closer to the sound's origin, hoping to identify it before it identified her. A jaguar stepped out from the shadows, its golden eyes locking with hers. Time slowed. Neither moved. Then, instinctively, she remembered advice from survival videos she had once watched. Do not run, do not panic, show awareness, and respect the predator. A jaguar tilted its head, sniffed the air, and then silently vanished into the undergrowth. Her heart still raced, but she survived another encounter. Night fell fully, and the forest transformed. Sounds of nocturnal creatures became louder, the air cooler and damp, and shadows deeper and more menacing. She found another tree with thick vines and used them to form a crude hammock, dangling above the forest floor. Sleep came in short bursts, every rustle jolting her awake, every distant roar reminding her of her vulnerability. Hunger, fatigue, and fear were constant companions, but so was her will to survive. Each sunrise was not just a new day, it was a victory over despair. By the next morning, she had begun to notice patterns. The birds flew in certain directions when predators were near. Streams that glistened in the early sunlight often contained fish or edible plants. Paths formed by larger animals often led to safer clearings. The jungle, once an alien enemy, began to make sense, like a code she could slowly decipher. A betrayal had left her exposed, but it had also forced her to become adaptable, resilient, and alert to details she might have once ignored. Even as fear remained, a quiet confidence grew. She knew she would stumble again, and she would face threats that could kill her in an instant, but she also knew she could survive. If she remembered everything she had learned: patience, observation, caution, and adaptation. By mid-afternoon, she had traveled several miles, finding edible plants, drinking safely from a stream, and avoiding dangerous terrain. She was exhausted beyond measure, yet she felt a spark she had not known before, hope born from self-reliance. Her body screamed for rest, and her mind raced with the knowledge that the jungle would not forgive weakness. She had survived the first night alone, the second, and now the third day dawned with the promise of more challenges. She realized that predators were everywhere, but so too were opportunities. Edible plants, fresh water, and the chance to observe the jungle without being overwhelmed. Each encounter with danger taught her strategy. Each movement sharpened her instincts, and each breath reminded her she was alive against the odds. By the end of the second day, she collapsed by a large fallen tree, bruised, bleeding, and dehydrated. Yet she smiled faintly, tasting the bitter victory of survival. The jungle had tried to claim her, but she had endured. Hunger, fear, and exhaustion had tested her to the limit, yet she continued to move forward, one careful step at a time. And as she lay there, staring up at the dense canopy, she realized something profound. The jungle was merciless, but it was also a teacher. Every challenge it threw at her had made her sharper, faster, and more aware. She was no longer prey, she was learning to survive. Somewhere deep in the shadows, unseen eyes watched her progress. Not all were predators in the traditional sense. Some belonged to those who understood the jungle completely, who thrived where others faltered. She did not yet know it, but her path would soon cross with individuals who could teach her more than mere survival people, who had mastered the art of life in this unforgiving wilderness. For now, though, she remained alone, every sound a potential threat, every step a gamble. The jungle had not yet revealed its greatest lessons. By the night of the third day, she had learned enough to improvise shelter, forage for limited food, and detect signs of danger before it was too late. The betrayal had forced her into a crucible of survival, teaching lessons that could never be learned in a classroom. She realized that the jungle, as terrifying as it was, had become her proving ground. Each day she survived was a silent act of defiance against those who had abandoned her. And as the moon rose, casting silver light over the dense foliage, she made a vow: she would endure. No matter what came next, she would survive the wild, and she would not be broken. The jungle had begun to reveal its cruel lessons. By now, she had learned to tread carefully, to notice every subtle shift in the wind, every hint of movement on the forest floor. Her body ached with bruises and scratches, but her mind was sharpening. Survival demanded not just instinct, but strategy, and in that moment, memory became her greatest weapon. She recalled scenes from her life before the jungle, moments that seemed trivial then, but now became anchors in a world defined by danger. She remembered the first time she had seen them: Navy SEALs, tall, disciplined, and eerily composed. She had been on a brief trip with friends when they passed by a training facility, their presence commanding attention without words. Even from a distance, she could sense their mastery of the environment. They moved with calculated precision, reading terrain, weather, and instinct simultaneously, as if every step was preordained and every danger anticipated. Their actions were almost alien in their efficiency, a stark contrast to her frantic, instinct-driven movements in the jungle. She recalled watching videos of survival techniques once, fascinated by the way the SEALs could endure months in harsh conditions without hesitation. They trained in deserts, mountains, and jungles, but always with the same calm confidence. She remembered their advice: observe first, move second. Panic is your enemy. Control your mind, or it will control you. The words echoed in her mind now, sharper than any blade. The jungle had become her crucible, and these memories were the tools she had never expected to wield. The smell of damp earth and moss reminded her of rainy days back home, walking along muddy trails with friends. Then she remembered the books she had read, stories of explorers, soldiers, and adventurers who had faced nature's brutality and survived. They had not relied on luck alone, but on observation, preparation, and a deep respect for the environment. Every detail she had once dismissed as trivial became vital: how to spot edible plants, how to find fresh water, how to move without alerting predators. Memory, she realized, was her first lifeline. Her mind replayed the most crucial moments, watching the SEALs scale cliffs effortlessly, their movements precise, each step calculated. Seeing them traverse rivers with perfect balance, swimming through currents that would have drowned an ordinary person. Witnessing their patience in tracking animals or navigating treacherous terrain. The thought of that discipline ignited something in her chest, a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in days. She began to mimic them, imitating their careful steps, pausing to observe rather than charging blindly. As the hours passed, she reflected on what survival meant beyond simple endurance. The SEALs had taught, through videos and demonstrations, that survival was a balance between mind, body, and environment. They read the world like a book: the wind, the water, the rustle of leaves, even the way light fell through the canopy, all provided information. Now, alone in the jungle, she applied these lessons. A broken branch might signal a predator. A bird taking flight might reveal water nearby. A trail of insects could indicate danger or food. Every detail mattered. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, yet she felt empowered by her growing ability to assess her environment. She discovered a small stream, its water clearer than any she had seen before. Using leaves as a filter, she drank carefully, savoring the taste and strength it gave her. Nearby, she noticed clusters of edible roots and fruit she had previously overlooked. Slowly, she gathered a meager meal, and with each bite, she felt her body and mind begin to regain some strength. Memory and observation were becoming survival tools as vital as her own hands and feet. Her nights, however, were far from peaceful. The jungle was alive with unseen predators, and every rustle, every distant roar, reminded her that death was never far. She learned to build more secure shelters using vines, large leaves, and fallen branches. She listened to the patterns of nocturnal creatures, discovering which sounds indicated predators and which meant safety. Her memory of disciplined observation, inspired by the seals, became instinct. She began to anticipate danger before it arrived, noticing subtle cues that others might dismiss. She even began practicing mental exercises the seals had recommended in training videos, controlling her breathing, focusing her mind, and visualizing potential escape routes. Her fear did not vanish, it never would, but it became a tool rather than a prison. Panic had been her enemy. Now, she had learned to control it. She moved silently, spoke only when necessary, and trained her senses to detect even the slightest disturbances in the jungle around her. Each day, she grew closer to understanding not just survival, but mastery. Her memory also returned to her childhood, moments when she had hiked in forests near her home. She remembered how her father had taught her to recognize animal tracks, to listen to the sounds of water, and to notice the weather's subtle signs. These long-forgotten lessons became invaluable now, forming the bridge between instinct and knowledge. Each tree, stream, and clearing she encountered triggered a recollection, guiding her through the perilous terrain. She realized survival was not just about endurance, it was about connecting past knowledge with present circumstances. By the fourth day, she began experimenting with rudimentary traps and foraging techniques she had once only seen in books and videos. She crafted snares to catch small animals, tested different edible plants, and discovered natural remedies for the small cuts and scratches that marred her body. Each success, however small, reinforced her confidence. Memory had become the compass guiding her through the maze of green, while the lessons of discipline, patience, and observation inspired by the seals fueled her determination. The jungle tested her constantly. Swollen streams blocked her path, roots and vines threatened to trip her, and the ever-present threat of predators remained. Yet each challenge reinforced what she had learned. Patience, caution, and keen observation could compensate for physical weakness. Her body ached, but her mind became a weapon sharper than any blade. She started moving not out of desperation, but with purpose, slow, careful, strategic. Every choice she made reflected a combination of instinct, memory, and deliberate thought. As she navigated the dense undergrowth, she recalled a key lesson from the seals: adapt to the environment, don't fight it. She began to treat the jungle not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Fallen branches became stepping stones, muddy streams became guides, and natural clearings became opportunities to rest and regain energy. She began to anticipate danger rather than react, gradually turning the chaos of the jungle into a map she could read. Memory was no longer just a link to civilization. It was a survival toolkit. By nightfall, she had traveled miles, gathered sufficient food, and found a relatively secure place to rest. She sat quietly, listening to the forest's nocturnal symphony, her body exhausted, but her mind sharp. She realized she was no longer a frightened girl at the mercy of the jungle. She was becoming a survivor, a strategist, someone who could endure and adapt. Each memory, each lesson she had absorbed from observing the seals, from childhood and from books, became a lifeline she clung to fiercely. Sleep came slowly, light and interrupted, but she welcomed it. For the first time, she felt a fragile confidence, knowing that she had begun to decode the jungle's secrets. Each sunrise promised a new challenge, but also the knowledge that she was better equipped to face it. She understood now that the betrayal, the abandonment, and the cruelty of others had forced her into a rigorous school of survival. A school where memory, observation, and adaptation were the keys to life itself. And deep within her, a seed of determination took root. She would survive, not merely by chance, but through intelligence, patience, and skill. She had learned the first crucial lesson. The jungle was merciless, but with memory as her compass and discipline as her guide, she could navigate it, endure it, and ultimately, the jungle had become both her teacher and her tormentor. By now, her muscles ached constantly. Every step through the dense undergrowth felt like carrying lead weights, and her scratches had become angry sores that burned with infection. Hunger clawed at her stomach relentlessly. Thirst scorched her throat, and exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight. She had survived so far by relying on her memory, observation, and instinct, but the jungle was relentless. Every day was a battle, and every night a test of endurance. She feared she might not survive. She stumbled over roots and rocks along the riverbank, her feet slick with mud, her body trembling with fatigue. Sweat stung her eyes, and each breath felt like inhaling fire. She paused to drink from a shallow stream, cupping the water in her hands and washing her battered face. Her reflection in the murky water startled her. The girl who had entered the jungle was gone, replaced by someone gaunt, dirty, and haunted. Yet, in her eyes, a spark of determination refused to die, even as her body begged for surrender. The day was long, oppressive, and unrelenting. Sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, casting fractured shadows across the forest floor. Every sound, a falling branch, a rustle in the undergrowth, the distant roar of a predator, set her pulse racing. She moved cautiously, careful not to stumble, careful not to draw attention. Hunger made her desperate, but she forced herself to ration whatever edible roots and fruit she could find. She had learned patience from the seal's techniques she remembered, but patience was hard to maintain when her stomach ached like a gnawing wolf. Hours passed, and her body began to falter. Her hands shook from exhaustion, and her legs gave way under the weight of constant travel. She stumbled, falling face first into the mud, tasting bitterness and blood as her palms scraped against jagged roots. For a terrifying moment, she considered giving up. Her mind flashed with visions of death being swallowed by the jungle, becoming another forgotten victim of its unforgiving rules. But as fear gripped her, another realization pierced through. Surrender was not an option. She had already endured too much to give in now. As the sun sank lower, casting long, ominous shadows, she felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Her heart pounded violently, every nerve on high alert. The jungle was alive, and predators lurked unseen, ready to strike. She froze, listening intently. A low growl echoed through the trees, and she could feel the vibrations through the ground. A jaguar? Or perhaps a pack of wild dogs? She couldn't risk testing it. Survival demanded patience, observation, and strategy. Slowly, deliberately, she shifted her weight and moved behind a thick tree trunk, her breathing shallow, her eyes scanning for the faintest movement. The edge of collapse was near. Her legs threatened to give out entirely, and her vision blurred from dehydration. The few scraps of food she had gathered over the past days were gone. Her makeshift shelters provided little comfort. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of predators and decay. Yet, as the world closed in, she found clarity. Her mind, trained by fear and memory, sharpened. She reviewed everything she had learned: where to find water, how to identify safe plants, how to move silently and detect threats before they approached. Every lesson became her lifeline. She sank to the muddy ground beside a fallen tree, panting heavily, sweat and blood mixing with dirt. Her body trembled uncontrollably. She knew she could not continue much further without rest, but sleep was dangerous in the jungle. Predators moved with lethal precision, and any sound could draw them in. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the rhythm of the forest, the distant splash of a stream, the low growl of a predator, the whispers of the wind through the canopy. She centered herself, using the breathing techniques she remembered from the SEAL's discipline videos, inhaling deeply and exhaling slowly, forcing calm into her panicked mind. Her thoughts drifted to her betrayers, the ones who had abandoned her without a second glance. Anger surged through her, fierce and bitter. They had thought the jungle would finish her, that she would vanish without a trace. But the fear and fury fused into resolve. Survival was not just about endurance, it was about proving them wrong. Every scrape, every bruise, every exhausted step was a testament to her determination. She would not succumb. She would endure, even when every part of her screamed to give up. Night fell fully, and darkness wrapped around her like a suffocating shroud. She clutched a thick vine for support, using it to pull herself along as she crawled toward the faint sound of a river. Each movement was agonizing, but she forced herself forward. The jungle seemed endless, a labyrinth of green and shadow that wanted to crush her spirit. Her body began to fail, her vision narrowing to mere shapes and sounds. She could hear the predators' calls growing closer, feel their presence in the vibrations of the earth. And yet, she refused to surrender. At some point, she collapsed completely. Mud covered her body, sweat and blood streaked across her skin, and her chest heaved with ragged breaths. She lay on her side, trembling, feeling the sharp teeth of despair gnawing at her resolve. She thought of her family, of her life before this nightmare, and for the first time allowed herself to imagine death. But even in that moment, deep in the edge of collapse, she realized something extraordinary. She was still alive. Her body might be broken, her energy depleted, but her will remained intact. Then, amidst the oppressive silence of the night, she felt a change, a subtle shift in the air. Movement approached, disciplined and deliberate. Footsteps, careful and calculated, echoed faintly through the trees. She froze, fear threatening to paralyze her. She did not know who or what it could be, but instinct screamed. These were not ordinary predators. The presence carried authority, precision, and control. Her body tensed, every muscle coiled, ready to react. From the shadows emerged figures she could barely believe at first, camouflaged, stealthy, moving like ghosts. Their eyes scanned the jungle with predatory precision, their movements silent but purposeful. They were armed, but not threatening to her. She could feel their assessment, the careful calculation of life and danger, and a strange sense of relief began to wash over her. She had heard of them in stories, in videos, in fleeting memories, the Navy SEALs, masters of the wild. The jungle that had tried to crush her had led her directly into their path. One of them knelt beside her, checking her pulse, voice calm, yet authoritative. "She's alive," he said, almost to himself, and the others nodded. Relief, awe, and fear intertwined in her chest. She had been left for dead, abandoned, and now found herself in the hands of those who truly ruled the wild. The SEALs moved with a fluid efficiency that made the jungle seem tame in comparison. They lifted her effortlessly, supporting her weak body, and carried her toward safety. Her betrayer's plan had failed spectacularly. She was no longer prey, but a survivor on the cusp of transformation. As they carried her through the dense undergrowth, she realized the full extent of her ordeal. The jungle had pushed her to the brink of collapse, but it had also revealed her resilience. Hunger, exhaustion, fear, and pain had honed her instincts, sharpened her mind, and strengthened her will. She had survived the edge of collapse, not by chance, but by determination, observation, and the memory of lessons that now felt more vital than ever. And now, with the seals guiding her through the shadows, she felt a glimmer of hope that survival was not only possible, it was imminent. By the time they reached a small clearing, she could barely stand. Her body threatened to give out entirely, but the knowledge that she was no longer alone gave her strength. The seals guided her to a safe area, offering water, basic first aid, and quiet encouragement. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of peace. The edge of collapse had been crossed, but survival, real survival, was only beginning. The jungle had tested her limits, but she had endured. And in that endurance lay a spark of something greater: hope, strength, and the first hint of mastery over the wilderness that had sought to destroy her. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as they approached. Every step she took beside the Navy SEALs was measured, deliberate, and silent. The men moved like shadows themselves, precise, aware, and completely at home in the dense, oppressive greenery that had once threatened to swallow her whole. She could hardly comprehend what was happening. Moments ago, she had teetered on the edge of death, barely able to drag herself through the mud and roots. Now, she was walking with the masters of survival, their presence commanding both awe and reassurance. The first thing they did was assess her condition with meticulous care. One knelt beside her, checking for dehydration, infections, and injuries, while another silently scanned the surrounding terrain for threats. She felt the professional efficiency radiating from them, the same calm, calculated confidence she had once observed from afar in videos and glimpses in real life. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt a flicker of safety, not a false illusion, but real, grounded, tangible safety. They carried her a short distance to a clearing, where the morning sun dappled the ground through the thick canopy above. The men instructed her to rest while they assessed the area, moving with practiced efficiency, marking potential hazards, and ensuring no predators lurked nearby. Every motion, every glance, every movement was deliberate. No sound wasted, no detail overlooked. She marveled at their skills, realizing that the jungle that had tried to claim her was almost insignificant compared to the mastery they wielded over it. Her body ached as they settled her into a small, secure area. They offered water and food, but more than that, they offered knowledge. One of the SEALs spoke quietly, explaining the terrain, pointing out safe paths, identifying potential sources of water and food, and teaching her how to avoid danger. The jungle, once chaotic and terrifying, began to feel like a challenge she could learn to navigate. For the first time, she understood that survival was not just about instinct, it was about skill, observation, and knowledge. She watched them carefully, memorizing every action, every technique, every gesture. They moved with absolute precision, reading the environment like a map. Leaves rustled in a pattern that indicated predators. Water flowed in ways that suggested safety or danger, and every fallen branch or footprint told a story. They communicated in subtle gestures and whispers, teaching her to see the world differently. Where she had once panicked at every noise, she now learned to interpret it. Where she had feared every shadow, she began to anticipate and understand it. Over the next several hours, the SEALs guided her through basic survival techniques. They demonstrated how to move silently over uneven terrain, how to detect the presence of predators without seeing them, and how to forage for food safely. She tried to mimic their movements, stumbling at first, but gradually finding a rhythm that felt more natural. With each step, she felt a shift within herself. Fear remained, but it was tempered by growing confidence. She was no longer a passive victim of the jungle. She was becoming an active participant in her survival. By evening, she was learning the most crucial skill: observation. The SEALs taught her to notice patterns, the way birds flew, the direction of the wind, the subtle vibrations in the earth. Every detail became meaningful. They pointed out edible plants and hidden dangers, showed her how to construct a temporary shelter that could withstand rain, and explained how to move undetected in the dense undergrowth. She absorbed each lesson with intensity, realizing that knowledge was her most powerful weapon. The jungle, once chaotic and threatening, now felt like a classroom. That night, as she lay in her makeshift shelter, she reflected on everything she had learned. The betrayal that had left her for dead had forced her into the harshest teacher imaginable, nature itself. But the seals had turned that challenge into opportunity, showing her that the jungle could be understood, navigated, and in a sense, tamed. Her mind buzzed with new strategies and techniques, her eyes alert to every movement outside her shelter, and her body slowly adjusted to the rhythm of survival in a hostile environment. Over the next days, the seals continued their guidance. They pushed her to test her limits, walking long distances, foraging in difficult terrain, navigating rivers, and climbing treacherous slopes. Each challenge was designed to teach her observation, patience, and resilience. She learned how to read animal tracks, detect water sources, and identify edible plants that she had previously ignored. Every moment of fear, every pang of hunger, every aching muscle became a lesson. She realized that she was not only surviving, she was learning to thrive. The seals also taught her how to respect the jungle rather than fear it. They explained that the environment was neither friend nor enemy. It was a force governed by rules. By understanding those rules, she could move confidently, avoid unnecessary danger, and find sustenance where others would fail. The knowledge transformed her perspective. The jungle was no longer a merciless adversary. It was a partner, a teacher, a puzzle she could solve with careful observation and skill. At one point, they demonstrated how to track animals for food, using subtle signs in the terrain. She followed their instructions, moving silently, observing the slightest changes in the undergrowth. Her heart raced with excitement and fear as she realized she was capable of feats she had never imagined. Each success, however small, bolstered her confidence and reinforced her growing mastery over the wilderness. She began to see herself not as a victim of betrayal and abandonment, but as someone capable of confronting even the deadliest challenges. The transformation was gradual, but profound. Her fear remained, a constant companion, but it was tempered by skill and knowledge. She moved with purpose, observed with precision, and reacted with calculation. Her body, once weak and trembling, grew stronger with each exertion. Her mind, once clouded by panic, sharpened like a blade honed by necessity. The jungle, once a chaotic maze of threats, became a structured environment she could navigate, interpret, and increasingly control. By the end of the week, she could move through the jungle with a new level of confidence. She had learned how to detect threats before they became immediate danger, how to find water and food efficiently, and how to maintain her strength and endurance despite harsh conditions. The seals had not only saved her life, they had transformed it. Where she had once been prey, she was now a competent participant in the wild, learning to move with the precision and awareness of the elite warriors she had long admired. One evening, as the sun set and the jungle filled with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, she realized something remarkable. She was no longer afraid of the night, no longer paralyzed by the thought of predators. She had learned to see the jungle not as an enemy, but as a series of challenges she could meet and overcome. The seals had taught her the most critical lesson of all. Survival was not about brute strength or luck. It was about knowledge, observation, and the will to adapt. As she settled down for the night, she felt a surge of gratitude and determination. The jungle had tested her, pushed her to the brink, and nearly broken her. But under the guidance of the seals, she had discovered resilience, strategy, and mastery. She was no longer a passive victim of her environment. She was learning to thrive. And somewhere deep within her, a spark of defiance began to burn brighter than fear. She would not only survive, she would endure, and one day she would face those who had abandoned her, and show them what true strength looked like. The shadows of the jungle stretched long and foreboding as night fell, but she was no longer invisible, no longer powerless. She had allies in the seals, knowledge in her mind, and an unbreakable will in her heart. The jungle still held dangers, but she had learned to move through them with skill, patience, and observation. She was becoming a force the wilderness had never encountered before, and the real journey, she knew, was only beginning. By now, she had begun to understand the depth of what it truly meant to survive. Under the seal's guidance, the jungle transformed from an overwhelming threat into a living, breathing classroom. Each day was a rigorous exercise in observation, patience, and endurance. Every fallen branch, every rustle of leaves, every subtle change in the air became information she could interpret. The seals moved with an efficiency that seemed almost supernatural, but she realized it was not magic. It was mastery honed through relentless discipline, training, and respect for the environment. The mornings began early, often before the sun had fully risen. They drilled her in movement, teaching her to traverse treacherous terrain without leaving a trace. She learned to step over roots and rocks with precision, to listen to the faintest vibrations in the soil, and to gauge which sounds signaled danger. At first, her steps were clumsy and hesitant, but the seals corrected her with patient guidance, demonstrating exactly how the jungle could be read like a complex map. Gradually, she began to move with a fluidity she never thought possible. One of the seals, a tall man with eyes that seemed to pierce through the dense foliage, showed her how to identify edible plants and insects. "Not all food is safe," he said, voice low and deliberate. "The jungle provides, but only if you understand it." They taught her which berries could be eaten raw, which roots had nutritional value, and how to prepare them without risking illness. Each small meal she gathered was a triumph, a reminder that knowledge could sustain her where instinct alone might fail. Water, once a simple necessity, became a complex puzzle. The seals taught her to read subtle clues, how moss growth indicated flowing water, how insects gathered near safe streams, and how to distinguish stagnant pools from clean sources. They showed her how to purify water using rudimentary methods, filtering through leaves, boiling when possible, and observing natural signs for contaminants. Every lesson expanded her confidence. The jungle, which had once seemed impenetrable, now had pathways she could navigate with intelligence and care. Tracking became her next challenge. The seals instructed her to observe animal movement, footprints, broken branches, and subtle traces in the undergrowth. She learned to differentiate between small animals and large predators, understanding which signs demanded caution and which indicated opportunity. Slowly, her senses sharpened. Her eyes noticed subtle changes in light, filtering through the canopy, the way leaves bent under weight, the tiny shifts in mud that revealed passage. She was no longer blindly walking through the jungle. She was reading it, interpreting it, predicting its movements. Every day, the seals pushed her beyond physical limits. Long treks across rivers, scaling steep hills, and navigating dense thickets became tests of endurance. Her body protested, muscles screaming, feet blistered, and hands raw. Yet each challenge was paired with guidance, how to move efficiently, conserve energy, and balance strength with caution. Pain became instruction, and fatigue became a teacher. She began to understand that survival was as much about mental discipline as physical capability. Her body was improving, but her mind was transforming into a precise instrument for interpreting the world around her. The seals also emphasized observation in silence. They demonstrated how to remain nearly invisible in plain sight, using shadows, leaves, and natural contours to their advantage. They taught her how to watch without being seen, listen without drawing attention, and move without leaving a trace. She practiced these techniques meticulously, crouching in the undergrowth for hours, learning the language of movement and silence. The jungle began to yield its secrets, revealing paths, safe zones, and sources of sustenance previously invisible to her untrained eyes. She learned about camouflage, not just visual, but behavioral. How predators and prey alike moved cautiously, how subtle body language conveyed dominance or submission, and how to blend into patterns of light and shadow. She studied the flow of rivers, the habits of birds, and the subtle cues of the wind. The jungle became a puzzle she could solve with observation, practice, and patience. Every day she applied lessons, tested theories, and adjusted tactics, refining her skills under the seal's watchful eyes. Hunting became another essential skill. The seals demonstrated how to catch small animals, build traps, and use tools improvised from the environment. She learned to identify footprints, predict behavior, and execute strategies with precision. The first successful catch filled her with exhilaration, not just for food, but for the proof that she could now manipulate the environment in ways that would ensure her survival. The jungle, once a threat that dictated her fate, had become a system she could interact with intelligently. Night exercises were perhaps the most challenging. Darkness amplified every fear, every sound, every shadow. Yet it was in this environment that the seal's teachings became most vital. She learned to trust her senses, control her fear, and respond with calculated precision. She navigated silently, detected movement before it became danger, and made decisions that could mean life or death. Each night, she gained confidence, proving to herself that she could thrive even when the world seemed most hostile. Her mental resilience grew alongside her physical skills. The SEALs emphasized that survival was 80% mental. They taught her breathing techniques to control panic, visualization exercises to anticipate threats, and methods to maintain focus under extreme stress. She learned to turn fear into awareness, exhaustion into strategy, and hunger into a driving force rather than a weakness. Every day, every obstacle, and every lesson reinforced her belief that she could endure anything the jungle threw at her. Weeks passed, and her transformation became evident. Her muscles hardened, her reflexes sharpened, and her perception of the jungle became almost instinctive. She moved with the careful precision of someone who understood the environment, and yet her mind remained alert to new lessons. Every day presented challenges designed to teach her self-reliance, critical thinking, and adaptability. She began to understand the deeper lesson of the SEAL Code. Survival was mastery over fear, mastery over the environment, and mastery over oneself. The SEALs also instilled a sense of respect. The jungle was not to be conquered with brute force. It was to be understood, anticipated, and respected. Each tree, river, and creature had a role, and by observing carefully, she could find her place within that system. Predators were not enemies to be hunted indiscriminately, but forces to be respected, understood, and navigated safely. The jungle had become a living ecosystem, a teacher, and a proving ground. By the end of this rigorous period, she had acquired skills she could have never imagined. She could find food and water in hostile terrain, move silently and unnoticed, detect threats before they arrived, and endure physical exertion beyond her prior limits. Fear remained, but it was now tempered with skill, strategy, and awareness. She was no longer the abandoned girl who had stumbled through the jungle in terror. She was a student of the wild, a survivor in training, and a force capable of enduring anything. As she rested in the early evening, listening to the symphony of the jungle, the croak of frogs, the distant roar of predators, the whisper of leaves in the wind, she realized the truth. She had been forged by betrayal, tested by nature, and trained by the elite. Every lesson, every scrape, every exhaustion-induced failure had prepared her for something greater. She was no longer vulnerable. She was learning to rule the wild, to navigate it with intelligence, and to survive where others would fail. In that quiet moment, she understood the deeper meaning of the SEAL code. Survival was not just staying alive, it was reading the environment, adapting, anticipating, and mastering oneself. She felt a flicker of pride, tempered by humility. The jungle was still formidable, but she now possessed knowledge, skill, and the discipline to thrive within it. The transformation was not complete, but it was undeniable. She was becoming more than a survivor. She was becoming a force of the wild itself. Weeks of rigorous training and relentless discipline had transformed her. The girl who had stumbled through the jungle, trembling and bruised, had evolved into a force both agile and aware, her senses finely tuned to every movement, sound, and shadow. She moved with the confidence of someone who understood her environment, no longer a victim of circumstance, but a participant in the rhythm of the jungle. Every step was deliberate, every glance calculated, every breath a tool for survival. The wilderness had become a proving ground, and she had emerged from it stronger than she ever imagined. The SEALs had begun to step back, watching as she tested her independence. Today, she would venture alone, truly alone, for the first time since the betrayal. Their eyes followed her with quiet pride, and their presence was a silent reminder that she was not entirely untested. She took a deep breath, recalling everything she had learned: how to detect predators, find water, gather food, and navigate through dense foliage without leaving a trace. Every skill was a lifeline. Every lesson was a shield. The forest greeted her like an old, familiar adversary. Shadows stretched long across the jungle floor as sunlight pierced the canopy, revealing patterns she had memorized. Her feet moved silently over fallen leaves and roots. Her eyes scanned constantly, reading the subtle signs of animal tracks, broken branches, and disturbed soil. She identified potential threats before they became immediate dangers and spotted opportunities for food and water with the precision of someone who had mastered observation itself. Hours passed as she moved deeper into the forest. The hunger and fatigue that had once threatened to overwhelm her now served as manageable challenges rather than paralyzing obstacles. She found a stream and drank cautiously, filtering the water through a makeshift leaf system. Nearby, she spotted edible roots and berries she had previously learned to recognize. Each action was methodical, executed with efficiency, honed over weeks of SEAL-guided training. The jungle was no longer a chaotic threat. It had become a landscape of opportunity and survival, mapped out by her sharpened senses. Predators lurked nearby, as they always did. She caught glimpses of shadows slipping through the trees, heard the rustle of unseen animals, and felt the vibrations of movement through the earth. But fear no longer ruled her. Instead, she moved strategically, using cover, silence, and observation to remain undetected. She tracked a small herd of deer for a distance, noting patterns in their behavior, learning when it was safe to approach and when to retreat. Each encounter reinforced her growing mastery of the wild. The jungle tested her endurance further with steep slopes, tangled vines, and hidden marshes. Yet she moved with confidence, every motion calculated. Her body, once weak and trembling, now carried her effortlessly across uneven terrain. Her hands, scarred and calloused, gripped vines and roots with strength and precision. She climbed trees to survey her surroundings, using height to assess potential dangers and locate resources. Every skill she had learned was put into practice, and the result was a seamless harmony between human instinct and learned discipline. Night approached, and with it came one of the most crucial tests: navigating the jungle under the cloak of darkness. The forest transformed into a maze of shadows and sounds, a realm where mistakes could be fatal. But she had been prepared. Using the SEAL techniques she had internalized, she moved with awareness, detecting subtle shifts in the wind, faint traces of animal movement, and the presence of potential predators before they posed a threat. Her breathing was steady, her body poised, her mind clear. The darkness that once inspired terror now offered tactical advantage. During her nighttime trek, she stumbled upon a recently disturbed area, signs of human activity. Broken branches, footprints in the mud, and discarded items indicated that others had passed through. Her heart pounded with a mix of curiosity and caution. Could these be the ones who had abandoned her? The thought of revenge flickered briefly, but was quickly tempered by the knowledge that survival, control, and mastery were more powerful than impulsive action. She moved silently, assessing the area without leaving a trace, learning from the patterns left behind. Suddenly, a distant sound caught her attention, faint, hurried movement. She crouched behind thick foliage, observing carefully. Two figures emerged, clearly unaware of her presence. Her pulse quickened, but she controlled it, recalling every lesson about observation, stealth, and anticipation. They were armed, cautious, and moving with intent, yet sloppy compared to the discipline she had internalized. For the first time, she realized she could predict human behavior in the wild, just as she had learned to predict animal patterns. The encounter became an exercise in calculated observation. She followed at a safe distance, reading body language, timing movements, and planning escape routes in case of detection. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was tempered by strategic thinking. Her mind was no longer consumed by fear. It was focused, sharp, and precise. Every instinct, every learned skill, every memory of SEAL guidance converged into a single, disciplined presence, silent, aware, and in control. Eventually, she found a safe vantage point and observed the strangers for an extended period. She noted their routines, their stops, and their vulnerabilities. She could see how untrained they were in the ways of the jungle, how easily they could fall prey to both the environment and a skilled observer. The realization brought a surge of confidence. She was no longer powerless. She had transformed into someone capable of navigating danger, reading threats, and surviving independently, even in the face of human adversaries. By the time she returned to the SEALs, the forest had grown dark, and the stars peeked through the canopy above. Her body was exhausted, but her mind buzzed with exhilaration. The journey alone had proven her skills, endurance, and strategic thinking. She had traversed dangerous terrain, hunted and foraged, and observed potential threats without being detected. The SEALs nodded approvingly, recognizing the transformation that had taken place. The girl they had rescued weeks ago was no longer the same person. She had become a force the jungle itself had tested and refined. In the days that followed, she continued to practice and refine her skills. The SEALs encouraged her independence while offering guidance when needed, pushing her to reach the limits of her ability. She learned to predict environmental patterns, anticipate predator behavior, and navigate the forest efficiently. Her confidence grew with each success, and her fear became a manageable tool, guiding her awareness rather than controlling her actions. Through it all, one thought persisted. She had survived betrayal, abandonment, and near certain death. Now, she had mastered the jungle to a degree that few could imagine. The transformation was complete, her mind sharp, her body capable, and her instincts finely tuned. She was no longer prey. She was a participant in the rhythms of the wild, capable of moving through shadows, surviving extreme conditions, and understanding threats before they arrived. As she lay beneath the canopy that night, listening to the symphony of the jungle, the croak of frogs, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of predators, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had triumphed over fear, mastered her environment, and harnessed knowledge and skill to reclaim her life. The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable had forged her into someone stronger, smarter, and more capable than she had ever imagined. The jungle had tested her, and she had emerged victorious. She understood now that the true measure of survival was not simply staying alive, It was mastering the environment, adapting with skill, and maintaining control over mind and body in the face of extreme danger. She had crossed that threshold. She was no longer a victim. She was a force capable of thriving in the wild, prepared for any challenge, and ready to confront the world and the people who had tried to destroy her. The jungle, once terrifying and merciless, had become a place of mastery. Shadows no longer intimidated her. They became tools for stealth and observation. Predators no longer induced panic. They were challenges to anticipate and navigate. And the seals, who had guided her from helplessness to strength, had equipped her with the knowledge, discipline, and confidence to survive independently. She was ready for whatever came next, the true test of her skills, courage, and determination. The jungle had become her ally. Every shadow, every rustle, every subtle vibration underfoot was now familiar. She moved like a phantom, silent and deliberate, eyes sharp, senses tuned to the slightest hint of danger. Weeks of survival training with the seals had transformed her from prey into predator metaphorically and literally. But there was one threat left she had not yet confronted: the people who had abandoned her, those who had left her to die in this merciless wilderness. She recalled the day they had betrayed her, how casually they had vanished, confident she would perish. Their cruelty had been unimaginable, leaving her alone in a dense, predator-infested forest with nothing but her wits. Anger had initially fueled her survival, but over time, she had learned to harness that emotion with discipline, converting it into clarity, patience, and precision. Revenge, if it came, would be executed with strategy rather than blind fury. The signs she had discovered in Part 7, the footprints, broken branches, and traces of human passage, led her to their hidden encampment. It was small, poorly constructed, and exposed, a testament to their lack of understanding of the jungle. She crouched in the shadows above, observing quietly, memorizing routines, noting weapons, guards, and escape routes. Every detail mattered. A single misstep could alert them, jeopardizing both her safety and the lessons she had painstakingly learned. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with anticipation. She had transformed completely. Her senses were honed, her movements precise, her mind razor-sharp. The SEAL's teachings had not only ensured her survival, but given her the tools to operate effectively in the wild against human threats. She could anticipate movement, read patterns, and act decisively without hesitation. For the first time, she realized that she was no longer vulnerable. She was capable of mastering not just the jungle, but the humans who had once sought to destroy her. As dusk fell, she made her move. Using shadows as cover, she descended silently from her vantage point, weaving through undergrowth and vines like a ghost. The betrayers, unaware of her approach, went about their routine laughing, setting small traps, and boasting over small victories. They were careless, overconfident in their assumption that she was gone. Each careless move provided her with information, each laugh revealing their arrogance. Her lips curled into a quiet, controlled smile. This time, she was in control. Her first act was observation, not confrontation. She circled their camp, noting weaknesses in their perimeter, areas where she could move undetected, and paths for retreat if necessary. She identified which of them were most alert and which were distracted, measuring reaction times and predicting behavior. This was a strategy born not of vengeance, but of survival. The jungle had taught her patience. The SEALs had taught her precision. Now she combined both in a deadly harmony. She found a small stream nearby, a safe place to observe while replenishing water. Her hands were steady as she drank, her eyes never leaving the camp. The betrayers were careless, setting traps without considering their own movements, neglecting basic security. She noted every flaw. She did not move recklessly. She had learned that the forest rewarded patience and punished impulsiveness. Every action was calculated, every step measured. This was no longer survival, it was strategy. Night descended fully, blanketing the jungle in near total darkness. She used it to her advantage, moving silently through undergrowth and shadows, her body perfectly attuned to the environment. She had become part of the jungle itself, an unseen, lethal presence capable of observing without detection. Her senses picked up the smallest sounds, the crunch of a branch, the shift of a leaf, the subtle echo of footsteps. She was both hunter and survivor, fully confident in her ability to navigate danger. The first confrontation came suddenly. One of the betrayers wandered away from the camp, distracted by a crude signal fire. She struck silently, using her trained reflexes to disarm and immobilize him without raising an alarm. Every movement was precise, efficient, and silent, a reflection of the countless hours she had spent learning stealth and control. The forest swallowed her presence once more as she retreated into the shadows, leaving the betrayer unconscious but unharmed. This was a warning, a demonstration of her capabilities. She repeated the process, observing the others' responses. Panic and confusion spread among them, their overconfidence replaced by fear as they realized someone had infiltrated their camp. Yet she did not rush into confrontation. She controlled the situation, forcing them to expose weaknesses while maintaining the upper hand. The jungle itself became her ally, every tree, shadow, and rustle aiding her movements. Her training, her experiences, and her survival instincts converged perfectly in this moment. Hours passed, and the betrayers became desperate. They attempted to leave the camp, but she anticipated every move. One by one, she intercepted them, not with lethal force, but with the threat of skill and precision. The fear in their eyes mirrored the terror she had once felt in the jungle, but now she was the embodiment of that controlled power. She could have unleashed fury, but she chose strategy over vengeance, demonstrating mastery rather than mindless rage. Finally, only the ringleader remained, the one who had orchestrated her abandonment. She cornered him near a riverbank, her stance calm, eyes unblinking, every muscle controlled. He reached for a weapon, but her reaction was faster. She disarmed him effortlessly, using technique and leverage rather than brute strength. For the first time, he saw her fully not as a frightened girl, but as a predator of the jungle itself, a product of betrayal, endurance, and training. "You underestimated me," she said softly, voice steady, eyes locked on his. The words carried both authority and warning. "The jungle didn't kill me. You didn't kill me. I survived, and I mastered what you thought would destroy me." He stammered, fear evident, unable to comprehend the transformation she had undergone. This was no longer a girl abandoned in the wild. This was a survivor, a strategist, and a force beyond his control. She allowed him to leave, wounded in pride, but unharmed physically. Survival, she realized, was not about revenge. It was about mastery, control, and demonstrating strength. The jungle had tested her, the seals had guided her, and now she had asserted her place in the hierarchy of life and skill. She had endured betrayal, pain, and fear, and emerged not only alive, but transformed into someone formidable and self-reliant. As dawn broke over the jungle, the forest alive with birdsong and rustling leaves, she stood alone on a high ridge, looking out over the world she had conquered. Every scar, every bruise, every ache was a testament to her endurance. The jungle, once a realm of terror, had become a place of mastery. She had survived the impossible, mastered her environment, and proven that even when abandoned, the human spirit, sharpened by discipline and determination, could rise stronger than ever. The seals returned at sunrise, watching silently as she surveyed the jungle. Their nods of approval confirmed what she already knew. She had transcended survival. She was no longer prey, no longer vulnerable, and no longer defined by fear. The jungle had been harsh, betrayal had been cruel, but she had endured, adapted, and emerged victorious. She had become a living testament to resilience, strategy, and mastery, a survivor who could thrive in any environment, and who would never again be underestimated. In that quiet dawn, she felt a profound sense of liberation. The ordeal that had begun with abandonment and terror had concluded not with death, but with empowerment. She had faced nature, adversity, and human treachery, and she had prevailed. The jungle no longer intimidated her. It had taught her, refined her, and ultimately made her unbreakable. She was no longer the girl left to die. She was the survivor who had conquered the wild, mastered herself, and reclaimed her power.